First, the issue of, in these conflicts, the soldiers' use of rape as a weapon of war in Bosnia, Rwanda, Darfur, Congo. We need a mechanism to hold the individuals accountable for their crimes. Have you any thoughts on the question of whether a UN charter, the UN charter could be amended to hold member states responsible for prosecuting their nationals who commit criminal acts while serving in an international peacekeeping operation? And, or in the alternative, should there be an international mechanism, a military tribunal established for these kinds of cases? The other issue I'd like you to address, you touched on an interesting point in pointing out some of the priorities, particularly in Africa, for the sustaining and strengthening of peacekeeping operations, and then mentioning that Somalia was a case where that wasn't appropriate. And I'm curious, could you expand on that a little bit, the notion of where it makes sense and where it doesn't in your mind? So I now, with my remaining 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two very important issues you raised. Let me begin with the first, about accountability for sexual crimes and other abuses committed, I presume you mean to focus on by peacekeepers. Is that right?
Well, I mean...
Or do you mean criminals in war?
Both. But let's start with the peacekeepers.
Okay, because they're very...
You touched on the
answers are would be quite different.
Okay.
First of all, obviously, the United States, the administration, Congress, we are all deeply concerned about the prevalence of rape as a crime of war. It is not a new phenomenon, unfortunately. It is as old as time, but it is particularly egregious and strikingly prevalent in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, which I visited myself recently in May and spoke with victims of sexual abuse and rape. It's prevalent in Congo and Liberia, Sudan, and elsewhere. And these need to be addressed in a very serious way when they are committed by combatants as well as by peacekeepers. Now, I think it's important, very unacceptable, egregious instances of abuse by UN personnel. That is a very small fraction of the problem. The vast majority of peacekeepers, as Ms. Rose-Laitman pointed out, are responsible, principled, and are contributing to the protection of civilians rather than the alternative. But where abuses occur by peacekeepers, there does need to be accountability, which is why we have been so supportive of the UN's zero tolerance policy, its placement in the field of code of conduct teams that can investigate, that can train, and that can enable mission leaders to hold accountable personnel and remove them. The present circumstance, however, as you know, is that every national government, every troop contributing country is responsible ultimately for the prosecution and the disposition of their own troops in cases of crimes. That is, as you know, a privilege we jealously guard ourselves. And so while I think it is certainly worth considering and exploring what additional legal mechanisms, international legal mechanisms might be available to ensure that when perpetrators are identified and convicted, that they are in fact held accountable, we need to be realistic about what member states are prepared to allow their own personnel to be subjected to in the form of international justice. It's analogous to the debate that we're all familiar with that we've had in this country and elsewhere with respect to the International Criminal Court, which is a vehicle theoretically that might be appropriate in this instance. And so when you talk about an amendment to the UN Charter, you're talking about 2/3 of the member states of the General Assembly, ratification by our own Senate, and I think it's a high bar, because if we were to sponsor that, we would have to be willing to subject ourselves to it.